the second day in a row, Governor Lombardo is addressing school violence. The governor making that push at Valley High School, which reported some of the highest rates of violent incidents in Clark County.
It came after the rare move yesterday when the governor testified to state lawmakers backing a bill with tougher punishments for students. Fox says Mike Allen is there right now. So, Mike, what the governor have to say today?
Well, this bill would make it easier for schools to handle students who are being violently disruptive in class. For example, by making it easier to expel them or suspend them. And here's what the governor had to say about his plan. A day after making his case for the Safer and Supportive Schools Act to the Nevada State Assembly, Governor Joe Lombardo takes his pitch on the road, stopping at Valley High School in Las Vegas Friday afternoon.
Let me be clear. We don't need any more victims of school violence. What we need is serious reform and legislative action.
Lombardo says violent students make it harder for kids who actually want to learn to do so. A senior at Valley High that I talked with after the governor's address agrees with that point and says there's really not much that teachers can do right now to stop bad behavior.
Even being warned by the teacher doesn't make them stop disrupting the classroom. Over time, students just get used to it or just plug in their headphones. That's what I do, listen to music while doing our assignments.
To work around this, Yassine Amos now has to make extra effort just to make sure he's learning what he should.
I always try to, like for example, stay after class and talk to the teacher if there's something that I didn't hear because they're so busy dealing with something that, of course, they shouldn't have to deal with, but unfortunately have to.
This bill, along with similar ones that have been introduced recently in the state assembly, has been criticized for not addressing the needs of those disruptive students who, some say, may get lost in the shuffle after being removed from their schools. Governor Lombardo addressed those concerns.
To ensure that this legislation is executed properly, suspensions and expulsions will be monitored, and teachers who are excessively removing students from the classroom will be identified.
A member of the Dads in Schools organization who attended the governor's address also wants to do right by those kids, but says it cannot be at the expense of other issues.
As much as we want to protect those kids, and we certainly do, we want to protect the larger environment, because when you have repeated violence in school, everybody suffers. Teachers, staff, other kids, it reduces the amount of learning.
The governor also pointed toward another facet of the bill that he believes addresses concerns about what happens to those problem students.
The Safer and Supportive Schools Act also increases accountability by allowing intervention by the state superintendent where necessary. Every child should be given the opportunity to stay in school, and the accountability measures in this bill will help do just that.
Governor Lombardo says all 17 superintendents in the state of Nevada support this bill, including CCSD Superintendent Jesus Jara, who's in attendance today. Live at Valley High School, Mike Allen, Fox 5 News, local Las Vegas.
We also asked Governor Lombardo how he feels about students recording incidents on their cell phones, just like the one near Durango High School. Here's what he had to say.
I think it's appropriate to record it, but we also have to, the first question that was presented when I stood before you today was, it was a juvenile. And we have to ensure that we abide by the law and the identity of a juvenile and let the court make that decision.
So far, CCSD Police and Superintendent Jara will not speak with us about the incident, citing an open investigation.